Well, Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci may be out, but the White House is still focused on sending out a clear message about the administration's agenda. Economic advisor Gary Cohn saying today the president is still 100% committed to getting a tax reform package done this year. Now, the White House is looking to get a bill on reform through Congress by November. Joining me now, Americans for Prosperity Director Tim Phillips, who sat on a panel today with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. The topic, a fair tax code. Tim, it's great to have you on tonight.
Good to be here, Cheryl.
So what did the Treasury Secretary say to you today? What did you hear from him?
He reaffirmed the blueprint that the administration had laid out, which dramatically lowers rates across the board. It simplifies the code. It gets rid of some of the special write-offs, carve-outs in the code that favor the more politically connected. And he made a point that they're determined to get this done this year. He understands the calendar, and they're determined to move quickly, and we agree with all that. And we're also pleased that the joint statement from last week with the House and Senate leadership and the White House did not include this onerous border adjustment tax. So we think this is a great blueprint, Cheryl, and we're ready to move forward.
Did the issue of corporate taxes come up? Because, you know, Senator Orrin Hatch has already come out and said he thinks it would be miraculous if we even got the corporate tax rate below 25%. The administration pitched 15%. Did he address that today?
He certainly said that the corporate rates that they talked about in the blueprint, which originally calls for 15%, is absolutely the goal, and we second that. And it's important to go big. If you simply nibble around the edges, that's not going to get this economy going. It's not going to genuinely give the kind of growth, unrig this economy we need. So we're urging them to go big, and the blueprint is at 15%. We think that's a great place to be. But
will the political environment support that, Tim? Stay with me. I do want to bring in Wall Street Journal editorial page writer Jillian Melchior for more, of course, with what's going on with Congress, the administration. I mean, there's big repercussions here politically if they don't get tax reform done. And after what we've seen in health care, this seems to be a bigger fight, a tougher fight than one would have predicted even 3 months ago.
I think you're absolutely right. Look, Democrats have been able to get out with Obamacare and make the message that this is benefiting the rich, that the Republicans are the party of the rich, hurting the little guy. Their failure to, I think, communicate effectively on Obamacare and kind of buying into that rhetoric really sets them up for failure with tax reform right now. And this is something that they desperately need. I mean, voters are going to be furious that they gave Republicans everything that they needed to pass Obamacare repeal and replace, didn't accomplish that. As they're facing re-election, they at least need that little economic bump.
We've got the budget. Here's the thing. Here's my question, Tim, to you. Maybe the Treasury Secretary addressed this today. You know, the president's talking about, and we're going to be bringing this up later on in the show, you know, he still wants to fight on health care. He wants the Senate to keep fighting to repeal and replace. But at the same time, you've got the budget. They need to fund the FAA. You've got tax reform. I mean, all of these things are coming to fruition with only 2 weeks in the Senate and the House is gone. Did he talk about that today, Tim?
Mark Short, the legislative director, and Secretary Mnuchin did talk about the calendar and the need to get a budget for fiscal year 18 done. That has to be done as soon as they get back. And yes, you're exactly right. It would have been better to have gotten that completed before they wrapped up for the August break, but they didn't do it. I think they do know that the stakes are so much higher for them on tax reform because of the failure on health care, A. But B, I do think it's important to point out the Republican Party in a broad sense is far more united coming out of the chute on tax reform. It's a big deal when the House and Senate leadership, with a lot of the rank and file members supporting and the president agree to principles that are pretty wide ranging. So I do think they're better positioned on tax reform. Certainly, we've pivoted to tax reform. Health care was disappointing. We're going to revisit it down the road, but now's the time for tax reform.
Well, but the thing is, Jillian, when you get into the weeds and you start to have this debate, and you know, you have the House debating, and then they pass something, and then it goes to the Senate, and they debate it, and they pass something, all of a sudden, every state has a different attitude, and that's where you get to the weeds of the tax reform package. Simplistically, sure, let's have 3 tax brackets. Great, let's have a 50%, corporate tax rate, sure. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you know that it's going to get bogged down in amendments and special interests. I'm sorry to say that I'm a bit of a pessimist.
I'm a bit of a pessimist on this as well. I mean, you saw our elected officials acting every man for themselves on Obamacare in a way that I think was actually pretty disgusting. I can't believe that this is going to play out better with tax reform, given the entrenched special interests, given how much that dilutes any real reform. But I mean, the one saving grace, they need this. They really, really need this, and I hope they'll have the clarity of thought to see that this is important for them to accomplish politically.
Well, then, Tim, if she's, I hope she's right. I want to believe that. If that's true, then what can they agree on? What is the easiest thing for the Republicans to agree on right now when Gary Cohn and Mnuchin's package finally comes out and we get to take a look at it?
Lowering rates across the board, or at least as far across the board as possible, specifically starting with the corporate rate, but also beginning to unrig the economy here, and that means doing away with some of the carve-outs and special exemptions in the code. And I think it was pretty gutsy for the administration, the right thing to do, to end the write-off, or to call for ending the write-off for state and local taxes, for example. That benefits mostly wealthy folks. It's a deduction that needs to be done away with, along with many others. So I do think it was a strong start. There is unity on lowering rates as much as possible, unrigging this economy. And I do think Republicans understand that they are in a tight spot after the failure of health care. It does tend to bring them together. We're encouraged with where they are right now. And I agree, there are going to be a lot of special interests digging in and demanding their piece of the pie. But this is a chance for Republicans to go straight to the American people and talk about a fairer, simpler tax code that actually helps lift everyone up to the American dream. And if they do that, if they go big and do that, they'll have support to get this done.